So thanks everybody for joining us today. This is Mark Schaefer. I'm the project manager with iNEMI for our sustainability activities. I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank Pamela for joining us today as well and speaking on what the work that the Clean Electronics Production Network is doing. I've known Pamela for 20 plus years probably now, and it has been a long time. And she is an awesome advocate for the environment and human health and so many different things. So I'm pleased that she's able to take the time out today to come and speak with us. I would ask folks, you are all on mute. If you have questions during the session, to please type them into the chat window and we'll gather those and ask them at the end. We do have time at the end of the session set aside to ask questions. If the lines aren't noisy, I can unmute folks and let you ask questions. Otherwise, I will just ask them for you. The slides will be made available to everybody that registered afterwards, as well as the recording. So we'll send that out probably within the next week or so. But I'm going to go off camera now, and I'm going to turn it over to Pamela and let her talk about the activity that she is working on. So thank you again, Pamela.
Great, thanks, Mark. And thanks for inviting me, and thanks to iNEMI for hosting this webinar, and welcome everyone. I'm going to talk about CEPN, and I am going to talk about towards zero exposure and our priority chemicals, but I'm also going to share some of the other work that we've done within the network and some of the work that's currently ongoing. So a little bit about CEPN, a little background for you. So we are a program of Green America Center for Sustainability Solutions. And what we do in the Center for Sustainability Solutions is tackle really complex supply chain issues that cannot be solved by any one individual business or organization or even individual stakeholder category. It really takes multi-stakeholders working together. And CEPN is specifically focused on collaborating to reduce worker exposure to toxic chemicals in the electronic supply chain. And when the group first formed and came together, they came up with a working goal of moving towards zero exposure of workers to toxic chemicals in the electronics manufacturing process. You know, understanding that's a North Star, but it gives everyone a direction, a shared goal to move towards together. In terms of scope, one of the other things when the group first came together, there was a recognition that there had been, and really continues to be, much more work being done on chemicals that are intentionally incorporated into products, so product chemicals, and much less work, both from a voluntary and a regulatory perspective, on process chemicals. So those manufacturing process chemicals that are not intentionally fully incorporated into products. And so this group felt that there needed to be work done in that area to protect workers. And so that's the focus of CEPN. We look at both hazard and exposure of these chemicals. So why are they important? Well, there's an increasing focus on processed chemicals from purchasing requirements and regulations. I would say not enough yet. That's my opinion. They are increasingly being viewed as a human rights issue, as they should be. Millions of workers in the electronic supply chain are using chemicals, potentially being exposed to chemicals. And then you see these, really large numbers that, the ILO recently estimated that around 1 million workers lose their lives to toxic chemical exposures annually, which equates to a worker dying every 30 seconds. That's in all industry sectors. And then most recently, really just a few days ago, there was a very tragic situation in South Korea. There was a fire at a lithium battery plant, chemical explosion, killed 22 workers, although I've seen 23 as well in some news reports. 18 of those were migrant workers from China. Really just a terrible tragedy. Shouldn't be happening anymore. That's why processed chemicals are so important. So a little bit about the journey of the network. It was launched 8 years ago, which is kind of hard to believe that 8 years have passed, in 2016. And what happened was, is a few brands recognized that this is such an important issue, but really to make a difference, they had to work together. And not only with each other, but with other stakeholders as well. So there's a recognition that process chemical management is an industry-wide issue and that companies share a supply base. So if they're really going to be able to impact the supply chain, they needed to come together to do that. For the first few years, CEPN members really focused on developing processes and resources and tools for process chemical management and chemical safety. And then after a few years, members really started to think about, okay, how can we really integrate and leverage use of these tools and resources into the industry? And they came up with the idea of a commitment program. So the commitment program for all electronics companies, so not just the CPN members. And then the group spent a few years developing the Towards Zero Exposure program, which was launched a few years ago in August 2021. The other work that was done during that time to support the Towards Zero Exposure program and also other programs was developing priority chemicals. And those are chemicals that the group felt should be prioritized for elimination, substitution, and 2 rounds have been published. There's also other work that I'm going to share with you that's being done, developing chemical safety training. There's talk of exploring an industry-wide MRSL and work that the group is doing, identifying safer solvents. So I just want to mention that in terms of getting involved, if there are companies and organizations that are interested, we welcome you to reach out. It is invitation only, but the invitation often starts with entities reaching out and saying that they're interested in participating. And then also just to note that the Towards Zero Exposure program is open to all companies in the electronics industry, and membership within CPN is not required. So here's a quick snapshot of the organizations that are participating within the network. So we have leaders in the industry, Apple, Dell, HP, Intel, and others. We also have some suppliers, Inventec, and Seagate. Responsible Business Alliance, the RBA, is one of our special partners. They're a member, but they also really help us bring the tools and resources that the group develops to scale and to the full industry. We also have a couple chemical suppliers that are part of the organization, are part of the network, Inventec, and we have a brand new member that I didn't have time to add to this slide, but it's Actinano, and so we're really excited about that. We have labor and worker advocate organizations. We have some research and academic organizations that participate. And then we have another category, which is enviro and others. So those tend to be the environmental NGOs and others in that space as well. We do have 2 external advisory groups. We have an NGO advisors group, and those are worker advocates from around the world. These are folks that are really interested in the work that we do, but don't have the bandwidth to participate as regular members, but want to stay engaged. These are the folks that have the boots on the ground, are engaging with workers, and they really provide insight to us from the worker perspective. Super important. We're really value the connection we have with these folks. We also have a technical review board, and it's made up of safer chemistry experts. These are some external folks and a few CEPN members as well, and they meet when we're working on developing priority chemical lists. So it's sort of episodic, and they provide recommendations on priority chemicals. All right, so now let's talk about the Towards Zero Exposure program. So as I mentioned, it's a commitment program. The idea is to unite companies throughout the electronics industry on a journey to protect workers from exposure to hazardous chemicals. This program is it's intended to be a journey. It's not a pass-fail. It does include verification or self-declaration, so companies get to choose, at least for the first several years, which they prefer to do. But again, it's a journey. As long as companies are demonstrating a good faith effort and are showing improvement, they are welcome to be in the program. The program, again, was developed by members and advisors of the network, and it's really, the idea is to expand and reach deeper into the supply chain, where the potential for exposure to toxic chemicals gets even greater. Founding signatories include Apple, Dell, HP, and Fairphone. And again, it's now open to all companies in the electronics supply chain. There are 6 overarching commitments in the program, and then under each one of these commitments are requirements and then verification. So ways to demonstrate conformance, or at least where a company is in the journey. The first is eliminating exposures to priority chemicals. And the overarching idea is to protect workers from exposure to the priority chemicals. And again, these are done in rounds. And the focus is on eliminating or substituting these priority chemicals in selected facilities within a signatory supply chain, understanding that it's a journey and you have to start somewhere. So it's a certain number of facilities in the supply chain. The second requirement is process data collection. And here it's about collecting data on company and supplier facility use of process chemicals. And again, it's a certain number of facilities. We have a tool, a process chemical data collection tool that I'll talk about a little bit later. And also we are working with the RBA, and they're developing a process chemical platform, which is really going to make this even easier. The third commitment is worker engagement and participation. And this is really, the idea here is to build a safety culture around process chemical management, working with and empowering workers, and ensuring that they understand the chemicals that they're working with, ensuring that they're informed and actively participating in protecting their health and the health of other workers. And we do that through a variety of means. There's requirements for training, developing a joint chemical safety committee, doing periodic worker surveys, ensuring that there are grievance mechanisms in place, and so forth. The fourth requirement is reaching deeper into the tiers. And the idea here is to ensure that signatories are working with their suppliers on this program so that we can get deeper and deeper into the supply chain, again, where it's more likely that there is potential exposures. The fifth requirement is verification and reporting. So there are certain reporting requirements, and again, verification. The verification for the first several years, signatories can choose whether they want to do self-verification or they want to do third-party verification. And then after that, it does evolve to doing third-party verification. And then the sixth requirement is continuous improvement. So again, it's a journey. It's really about demonstrating that there's a good faith effort being made and that there is improvement year over year. So, as I mentioned, in August 2021, we released the first version 1.0. We made some minor revisions a little bit later, 1.1, and most recently, last fall, published version 2.0. And we did that because we received input from key stakeholders, so the Towards Zero Exposure signatories, CEPN members, as well as our NGO advisors. We also had a 60-day public comment period. And the idea was to simplify and increase flexibility of the program. That was the overarching goal. And there were really three key revisions that were made. One was instituting phased implementation of chemical priority rounds for elimination. So what we've done now is that signatories are able to choose if and when to initiate each round. So we now have round one signatories, round two signatories, and in the future, when we have additional priority chemical rounds, there'll be round three and so forth. And so that way, signatories don't have to commit to what they don't know for the future. So they're able to commit to each round as they are ready. The second thing that we did is ensuring alignment with other respected programs in this space. So, for example, within the EPEAT, the Global Electronic Council's EPEAT criteria, which is currently in draft, there are two criteria in the Chemicals of Concern module that align with the first two requirements of the Towards Zero Exposure program. So signatories that are doing the Towards Zero Exposure program then would easily get those optional points. The other thing that we aligned with is RBA's SFAP for chemical management. So that SFAP, so companies instituting the SFAP for chemical management then meet many of the verification requirements of the Towards Zero Exposure program. So alignment there. The other alignment, I'll go ahead and just do the last bullet, which was we looked for ways to reduce complexity by clarifying and streamlining program requirements to make participation really as accessible as possible. In terms of alignment, RBA just announced earlier this week the release of a program called their Chemical Management Leadership Program. We're thrilled that they've been working on this program in collaboration with us. And the idea is to really raise all boats, or as many boats as possible within the electronics industry. Their requirements are very much focused on due diligence in alignment with the OEC guidance on due diligence. But the topics are in alignment with the Towards Zero Exposure program, with the exception of the elimination and substitution. So the idea is that what we're going to do now is institute equivalency. So another alignment with a respective program. This will be RBA's program. And so companies that are doing RBA's Chemical Management Leadership Program will then have equivalency with many of the requirements in the Towards Zero Exposure program. And it will make it much easier for companies then to sign on as signatories for the Towards Zero Exposure program. So that's coming down the pike as well. In February, several months ago, we released our second annual report and really highlighting how the program has influenced and made impact globally. So we've touched facilities in at least 30 countries around the world. I realize this is a little challenging to read, and I apologize about that. But There have been over 700 facilities in the signatories' manufacturing supply chain that are estimated to have eliminated, substituted the first round of priority chemicals. Over 200 distinct supplier facilities have now been influenced to improve their worker chemical safety. Signatories have included over 100,000 workers in employee engagement and participation initiatives, and over 1,000 facilities in the signatories' supply chains have collected data on processed chemicals. So really really a huge impact, and we're looking to make it grow. So if anyone is interested, please do reach out. All right, chemical safety training. So this is a project that we are working on right now. We are wrapping up phase 1 and moving into phase 2. This work is being funded from a grant from GIZ, which is a German organization, and their funding comes from the German government as a result of their human rights due diligence legislation. And we had the great good fortune of getting some of that funding. And what we're doing is developing chemical safety training that will be free and publicly available to really reach facilities that may not have access, ready access to chemical safety training. And so what we are aiming to do is address the gap there by providing accessible deployment-ready training. And this is both for workers and for managers. So the idea is to disseminate best practices on process chemical management, reduce worker exposures to hazardous chemicals, strengthen worker safety and engagement, incentivize collecting data on process chemicals, and then also working with local trainers in different regions and build that capacity so that they can deliver impactful and cost-effective training. So where we are with phase 1 right now is we're almost done, developing modules, 6 modules for workers, 3 modules for managers, and then also a toolkit and a guide for creating site-specific chemical safety training. So for the worker training, looking at chemical hazards, chemical exposures, control approaches, hazard communication, importance of worker feedback on chemical safety. Those are all general trainings, and they're applicable, obviously, to any facility. But facilities also need to have site-specific, facility-specific chemical training. So what chemicals are being used in their facility? Where are those chemicals stored? Where are STSs available for the chemical products? And so the last item here is a toolkit and a guide for managers to then create facility-specific training for their workers. We're developing this training in 3 different modalities because again, the idea is to make it as accessible as possible. So for the worker training, we're going to have digital interactive training, webinars that are both live and recorded, and then in-person training. So we're going to be working with local service providers to deliver that training. The training includes slides with a guidance document on how to deliver that training, what kind of activities to do during the training. And we're going to be delivering training for trainers, and are also welcoming EHS managers into that training and so forth. The managers modules include the digital interactive training and the webinars, live and recorded. So we're not doing in-person training for managers. And then the toolkit and guide is digital interactive training for the managers with an embedded editable slide template. So they can download the slide template and make it their own and deliver it then to their workers. And again, all training materials are free and publicly available. The delivery of the in-person training wouldn't be free, but all the materials are going to be free and publicly available. So what we're doing in the next phase is we're going to be beta testing this training. So the idea is to deploy all of the training using the different modalities to selected facilities. We're targeting Vietnam and Malaysia. And then what we want to do is get feedback on the training, and then we will refine and improve the training. And then again, it will be free and publicly available to all in the electronics industry. We've received really an overwhelming response to the outreach we've done so far in terms of letters of interest from supplier facilities. We have we have 70 facilities right now interested in in-person training, 60 facilities interested in either the digital or the webinar training. Likely, we're not going to be able to accommodate all of that in-person training, but we're going to do as much as we possibly can. So if anyone has facilities in either of these countries that you think might be interested in participating in the beta testing, please reach out. All right, priority chemicals. So I've talked about these a little bit. I see a question about, is the training available? So what we're doing for the question was about, is the digital training available in the Asia Pacific region? So what we're doing for this next phase is we're going to be translating all of the training into Vietnamese and Malay. And so it will be available in those two countries in those languages for the beta testing. Following the beta testing, we'll get it translated into as many languages as we can. And then again, it will be free and publicly available to anyone, and then in as many languages as we can support.
Thanks, Pamela. I think that's the only question I've seen so far.
Okay, great. And feel free to ask questions. I'm really happy to answer questions as we go along. So many years ago in the network, in addition to the idea of the commitment program, what we heard from our members is that it was important to start coalescing around process chemicals that should be prioritized for elimination or substitution in electronics manufacturing. And so we started to work on that. We developed a whole procedure. We have 2 rounds to date. They're both focused on solvents. So the first round was published in 2019, 9 chemicals. The second round was published last year, 16 chemicals. Each of these rounds took over a year. Not so easy to research, identify, get agreement on chemicals to prioritize for elimination and substitution, but we're thrilled to have these so far. It was a very collaborative process. So all of our CEPN members were involved, the different stakeholder categories. We worked very closely with our technical review board, which, as I mentioned, is this external internal committee of 14 safer chemistry experts. We also worked with other stakeholders, such as RBA members and our NGO advisors. So we shared, various drafts with RBA members, got input on criticality, volumes of chemicals used, and so forth. And we feel like it's really, we're very pleased with the impact that these priority chemical rounds have had so far. So here are some examples. So RBA adopted our first round of non-priority chemicals as its industry-focused process chemical list as part of its IFPC policy. 9 of the 16 chemicals were featured in electronic watches guidance for public buyers. Both rounds are listed as a restricted substance list in the Pharos database. And again, the Towards Zero Exposure program, these rounds are part of that program where over 700 facilities in the signatories' manufacturing supply chains are estimated to have already substituted that, the first round. So here's a list of the 25 priority chemicals. These are available on the CEPN website as well, also on the Towards Zero Exposure website. And I included a definition of process chemicals here. Again, these are all solvents. Initially, with the first priority chemical round, folks were really focused on cleaners and degreasers. With the addition of the second round of priority chemicals, the group decided to expand to all solvent use, except within Towards Zero Exposure, we're still focused on cleaners and degreasers. And we use this definition of process chemicals, and I thought it would be good to share. So these are chemicals used during the manufacture of a product and or maintenance of related production equipment that are not intentionally fully incorporated into the product. So these include cleaning agents, solvents, lubricants, photochemicals, etc. It also includes adhesives and inks and coatings, which some people think of as product chemicals. We've included them as process chemicals because they are not intentionally fully incorporated into the product. There's a great deal of the product that volatilizes, that's intended to do that. So that is part of our scope. The other thing I wanted to mention here is in our first round of priority chemicals, NNP is included. And in our research into NNP and talking particularly to those companies in the semiconductor industry, it became clear that there isn't a viable substitute at market scale yet for photoresist stripping. So we do include a conditional use for photoresist stripping for NNP. And in the future, with future rounds, if there's a similar situation, we will continue to do so. So I show you this just to emphasize how long a process it is that we go through in the selection of priority chemicals. There's a nomination process. I will talk about that a little bit. Then we go through an evaluation process where we do a lot of research. We work with the technical review board. We work with our members. We reach out to others. We get as much information as we can. We work with our technical review board. And then there's a whole process where our members and our design team, which is essentially our steering committee, approves, ratifies. We do broader consultation where we go out to other entities. And a lot of this is iterative as well. We get feedback, we bring it back to the technical review board, we do more research and so forth. So again, both rounds took over a year to develop. I do want to just share a little bit about the nomination and evaluation process. So we start by members determining the focus area. So where is it that our members feel it's important to start? For both of the rounds, again, they were solvents. Our members felt that solvents were the low-hanging fruit, an important place to start in terms of the higher potential for exposure. Cleaners and degreasers, there's a number of chemical products that have been certified as safer by entities such as Green Screen. So that was what we've started with. And then what we do is we compile available information for chemicals. We look at MRSLs. We look at aggregated and anonymized data that was collected using our PCDC tool. And then we screen them against our high hazard criteria, and the high hazard criteria is listed there on the right side of the screen. We also solicit other chemical nominations. So we ask CEPN members, we ask our NGO advisors, our technical review board, RBA members, any other chemicals that should be considered. And then we review those chemicals for availability, potential availability of safer alternatives, use in the electronics industry, and so forth. So just to give you an idea, this is for our second round of priority chemicals. So we looked at MRSLs from 14 electronics companies, as well as a handful of non-industry organizations, came up with a total of 154 chemicals that were on at least one company MRSL or NGO. And then we filtered them. We pulled out the first round. Obviously, we don't need to look at those again. High hazard criteria. We were focused on solvents, so we only included those that were solvents, resulted in 14 chemicals. And then we looked at chemicals that were reported to be in use from 4 companies. It included data from 106 individual facilities in 6 different countries. There were over 700 unique CAS numbers, and then those were filtered as well, resulted in 24 chemicals. We put those together. There were 4 chemicals that were on both lists. We decided to set aside any petroleum distillates, and that's how we came up with the 16 priority chemicals in the second round. Okay, so moving on to some other of our existing tools and resources, and also what's on the horizon that I haven't already shared. So I did want to talk about our PCDC tool. So this is a standardized collection and reporting tool for process chemicals across the electronics supply chain. So early on in the work of CEPN, this was identified as a real need in the electronics industry. You know, we heard from suppliers that they were, getting tens, if not hundreds, of different requests, reporting requests for process chemicals in different formats, and it's a tremendous burden. And so the idea was to create this standardized reporting template. It's currently being used by several major brands. Many of our signatories are using it. It's available on our website. It's free. It's publicly available. It's an Excel workbook right now, but it's got a lot of embedded information and drop-down menus and so forth. We have a guidance document and instructional videos available in English, Chinese, and Spanish. And the most exciting, this is the on the horizon piece, is that RBA is developing, they're using this PCDC tool to then build a process chemical platform. And this is an enterprise platform where companies, suppliers will be able to input their information. It will be held confidentially, securely. They'll be able to give permission to their customers to view the information. And then customers will be able to have a dashboard. Will they be able to see what kind of chemicals are being used throughout their supply chain. So it's really, I think, going to be transformational. I think the first version is going to be released sometime this fall. So some other tools and resources that CEPN has developed, we have, and these are all on our website, we have a qualitative exposure assessment methodology. And the idea of this methodology is to support facilities that may not have EHS personnel and industrial hygienist on staff. So it's a simple methodology for assessing exposure potential. We also have an alternatives assessment guide. Again, this is supposed to be a very simplified approach to looking at alternatives. We have resources for safer alternatives. So on our website, you can go and you can find out, you can look through safer alternatives that have been certified via a variety of different assessment entities. These are live API links, and so they're kept up to date and it's all in one place, so you can find that. We also have a guidance document on developing and operating a joint chemical safety committee in facilities, and we have a survey, a worker survey on chemical safety, and this survey is also available to be deployed. You can find it on our website, and it's also available to be deployed through RBA's Worker Voices app. The other thing that the group is starting to explore, and we're in dialogue with RBA on this, is an industry-wide MRSL. So is this something that the industry would be interested in? Would it be helpful? So we're very early on in that. We're assessing interest, viability, potential partners. And so if anyone is interested in joining the discussion on this, please reach out. Love to hear from you. Another project that we are working on is safer solvents. So our 25 priority chemicals are all solvents. And of course, we hear from folks, it's all very well and good to have what we shouldn't use, but what should we use? What is safer? And so while there are chemical products that have been certified as safer, there's much less available in terms of a one-to-one or a one-to-two. If you don't want to use this chemical individually or in a formulation, what might be a substitute that both works functionally, that's functionally equivalent, and that also is safer. And so we are looking at a methodology where we're identifying potentially functional solvent alternatives using Hansen solubility parameters. So we're using a software that was developed, and then for our 25 priority chemicals, there were several thousand that were identified through this project or through this database that were potentially functionally equivalent. We partnered with Chem Forward, and they ran it through their database of chemical hazards to identify which of these could be potentially safer as well. And so now we're looking at the output of that. We did it on a one-to-one, and we're exploring possible next steps, thinking about what about looking at 1-2? So one of our priority chemicals for elimination and substitution, and what perhaps 2 chemicals could be considered from a functional and safer alternative. So we're in the midst of that project. Once we get a little further along and have some results to share, we will include those in our on our website as well. So final thought that I really want to leave you with is that collaboration is really a key to progress. And, our members have come together talking across and collaborating across stakeholder categories. Definitely takes more time and more effort, but it really generates more credible and more impactful results. And we see that in the increasing alignment, the references, and the use of our tools and resources. For example, TCO Certified uses our PCDC tool. It's required now in their Generation 9 and their Generation 10 that's coming up. standard. And again, I had mentioned Electronics Watch. They're referencing our priority chemicals, the Pharos restricted substance list, RBA's industrial focused process chemical list, the Towards Zero Exposure program and the priority chemicals, and some of our tools are also included as key performance indicators in the solar scorecard. So that's even a different industry sector, and then also in alignment with EPEAT's draft chemicals of concern criteria. So we're really thrilled about that, and looking to continue to have increasing alignment and impact. So I want to thank you all for your time. I look forward to questions. Want to emphasize again about how to get involved. We really welcome individuals and organizations that are either have demonstrated leadership or are interested in getting more into the leadership space in terms of safe and sustainable workplaces. And Towards Zero Exposure, of course, is open to all companies in the electronics industry. So thank you all, and thank you, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Pamela. Very good. Lots of good information, and as she says, collaboration is the key for iNEMI, for CEPN, for so many of us. So I do appreciate your time today. So I do want to open the floor if there are any questions or comments. Hi, Tom. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Hi, Pamela. Yes, thank you very much. It's a very insightful, very good presentation. I have a question regarding research that's being done. Is the Clean Electronics Production Group doing any co-funded research with groups? Or are they trying to get monies, or how do they go about doing work like that on the side?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a blend. So the training that we are doing is all grant funded. It may be in this next phase that some of the companies that are participating, if they would like to do the in-person training beyond what we have funding for, there may be some additional funding coming in. We do a lot of partnering with other organizations. So there's some in-kind that happens as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And any work ongoing pertaining to trying to get like epoxy resins to be reusable at end of life or anything, or ways in which you can work with safe solvents to take epoxy resins and break them down?
Not for us currently, but it would be a very interesting area to explore, and I'd love to chat with you about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, Pamela, so Tom is the chair of the iNEMI Sustainability or Sustainable Electronics TIG, and he's
great.
with Nokia. So he's been an advocate for so many different sustainable work that we're doing. So
let's talk, Tom.
Yeah,
sure.
We can hook you up then. I have a question. I mean, you go through a lot of the chemicals and the things in the other organizations. I mean, what I don't know what I guess like LCA work or other scientific work for how maybe the impacts of like the substitutes that you might put in place for some of these things that you would eliminate. What's being done in there to make sure that if I'm transitioning out of one of these chemicals into something else, that I've picked something that's better, basically, or at least less harmful. What's
avoiding
going on there?
regrettable substitutions.
Yes, exactly. What's going on there?
And that's, yeah, absolutely. And that's why we started the Safer Solvents project. So, and why we have on our website an easy resource to chemical products. Well, cleaners and degreasers is the area right now that most of the assessment organizations have been certifying. So that's, we try and make it as easy as possible to find that. But there's so much work that needs to be done in that area, and we're we're working on it.
Mhm.
And actually, I'd love to put a plug in for there's a new initiative, and I can connect people if they're interested. So one of the things I would like to say, sorry, quick tangent, is that CEPN as a network, a lot of what we do is connecting, and others do, and we work with others on the deep science. So you can think of us as the connector and the safe space where conversations take place and initiatives launch. So the initiative that I wanted to mention is it's a Center for Excellence on Alternatives Assessment, and it's being launched by Dr. Joel Tickner, who's with Change Chemistry and the Lowell Center at UMass Lowell. It's being funded by DoD, and what they are really interested in doing is developing a center for alternatives assessment, where alternatives assessments are done in a collaborative public way that could then be used throughout different industry sectors. Doing a full-blown alternatives assessment is incredibly expensive, and so to do it in a collaborative way. The two chemicals that they are considering starting with and piloting, and they're looking for companies that would like to get involved, are NNP, particularly for photoresist stripping, because that's a tough one, and also TBBPA. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that list. I was looking through your priority chemical list. I was like, let's see, when I was in manufacturing, which of those did I use? And way too many of those are on that list from the mid 90s. I'm like, I don't know. I like that. And apparently they're still being used. So apparently that you got to find some solutions.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
good. Very good. Other comments from anybody on the line? And Pamela, if you want to send me a couple of links, I can make sure that when we send out our note, to everybody that registered, we can add in some how to participate and other things to look at, kind of things. I can add that into our
Right.
email. So just drop me a few links or whatever you'd like, and I can get that added in.
Right. Absolutely.